The Titanic's going to sink? My, you do have an imagination.
A show about time travelers popping up randomly throughout history to fix things. I know. That doesn't exactly narrow it down, but look, it's not the time tunnel. It's not Quantum Leap or 7 Days. Voyagers.
Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross.
There is no American Red Cross.
There will be one.
Television shows about time travelers often have a random element about them, in that from week to week you don't know where they're going. A show where a time traveler actually is able to pilot their vessel or craft or device or time travel method wouldn't necessarily make for the most interesting of shows.
You are found guilty in the charge of practicing witchcraft in the town of Salem.
Voyagers ran for one season, running on NBC from October 1982 to July 1983, and followed the breakneck adventures of a pair of time travelers journeying from one time period to another to put history back on track.
Can you forgive me for having doubted your word?
Sure, Your Majesty.
Basically, they're history's mobile dent repair.
December 6, 1941, Pearl Harbor, right on target.
Tomorrow that'll be a bad joke.
The pilot episode began with the recently orphaned 11-year-old boy, Jeffrey Jones. In hindsight, not a great choice for a name. A strange man breaks through Jeffrey's window on his high-rise Anyway, quickly enough, Jeffrey and the man are catapulted through time back to ancient Egypt. The man, Phineas Bogg, is a Voyager.
We're the people that are plucked out of time and trained to travel through the ages to help history along. Give it a shove where it's needed.
By going wrong, we don't mean time skips every second Thursday and gets stuck on a loop replaying Monday morning over and over, but big things like helping TV budget-friendly versions of Lawrence of Arabia or Abraham Lincoln.
Mr. President, please don't give up.
Bogg has a device that controls his travels, the Omni. The red light tells them history is verrucht, and the green light means roll credits, see you next week. Bogg can't get Jeffrey Jones back home since his Omni can only travel up to 1970, so that's the end of any attempt to return a child back to his legal guardians. Bogg is also not too smart, or at least not too book smart, since Jeffrey's dog back in '82 grabbed Bogg's guidebook.
England, 1066, Pearl Harbor.
Fortunately, and oh so conveniently, Jeffrey's late father was a history teacher, and somehow his son knows everything about history.
Smart kids give me a pain.
Which lets him conveniently explain things to Bogg and the audience.
I thought Clark and Lewis were comedians.
That was Martin and Lewis.
Oh.
Bogg, these are America's greatest explorers.
That guy who knows everything about history, science, art, music, movies, and literature. And all of his friends and family convince him to go on the $1 Million Quiz Show, where he's nobbled when the first question is about football.
Bat's breath.
Voyager episodes would often flitter between one or more time periods that sometimes are linked but other times are not. The pilot sees the pair land in World War I, where Jeffrey realizes there are no planes.
But you're the #1 ace. You should be up in the air dogfighting.
Dogfighting? I hate to tell you, but dogs don't fly.
And so they travel back to help the Wright brothers make the historic flight, only to find the brothers bickering about both wanting to court the same woman. Of course, she seems more interested in exploring some bog.
Doesn't this thing ever come down?
As is usual for a pilot where two people are forced together, they bicker a bit until Jeffrey breaks down over his parents' death and unloads.
I was alright. But Mom and Dad got real smashed up.
After that, they're the best as buds most of the time. Jeffrey's orphan status will come up every now and then. At one point, he will be offered a place to live by his great-grandfather, which leads to Bogg reluctantly taking a step back. But that would be the end of the series, so that didn't last long. In any rate, the series didn't last that long anyway.
World War II. This is great.
Great. You're getting a little warped, kid. No war is great.
Phineas Bogg is the charming time traveler, ready to buckle swashes, whatever the hell a swash is. But he's basically brave, confident, and ready to throw himself at anything.
Smart kids give me a pain.
Jon-Erik Hexum was a relative newcomer, with this series being an early starring role for the actor. His look and unusually deep voice, basically a baritone BG, made him a natural choice for a show like this. He's good at the action and also solid in the melodramatic scenes, which marked him as somebody who might have a fantastic career had things not turned out, unfortunately.
Traveled around the world in 80 days.
The French guy. Yeah, I met him once. Pulled him out of a brawl in Montmartre.
Hey, Bogg. Do you think he named the guy after
I guess he had to.
His young co-star Meeno Peluce by this time had already had a much longer resume than Hexum and was a go-to child actor from the late 70s to the mid-1980s. Child actors who could act, emote and not be a pain on set were rarer than hen's teeth during a hen's teeth shortage like that endured during the famous hen's teethocalypse of spring 1980.
Ben Franklin. It's Billy the Kid. That was Francis Scott Key.
Dr. Schweitzer?
The level of drama in the show did call for a mix of adventure acting, that is,
over there, we have to get that thing before the time runs out.
and more dramatic scenes. Basically,
I miss my dead parents, but I don't want to stop traveling with you.
All we have to do is find George Washington.
Jeffrey is a know-all, but not necessarily an annoying know-all. Uncle Reg, on the other hand, is a know-all, but an intensely obnoxious one, especially when he offers to fix your blocked toilet, but only if he can live stream it while he comments on what you've been eating. If you wanted to use an AI to generate a typical Voyager story, it would go like this. Jeffrey and Bogg would arrive somewhere in the past, time would have gone screwy, which would be quickly traced to some historical person not having been where they should have been at a particular moment in time. I don't know, due to incarceration, death, or maybe they were just stuck on the toilet. The pair would zap back to the earlier time to fix what had originally gone wrong. This wasn't like Quantum Leap, where you had Al show up halfway through and tell Sam what went wrong and what he likely had to do. Voyagers has a breakneck pace and sets up its story as economically as possible.
You mean the British are in control of the city?
Well, they have ever since the Battle of New Orleans. Come on, Sam, run! Where have you guys been?
Whenever Jeffrey and Bogg arrive somewhere, almost the very first person they meet conveniently has all the facts at their fingertips that would perfectly encapsulate the problem so that Jeffrey can work out what's wrong and then work out where he and Bogg would need to travel to in order to set things right.
But in 1944, America's supposed to be winning on Leyte Island.
Tell them that.
But what about MacArthur? He led the attack on this island and totally totaled the enemy.
MacArthur died over 2 years ago at the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Look, it's convenient for fast storytelling, sure, but then so is skipping to the last page of a murder mystery. So, who done it? Apparently the killer was called also by the same author.
Well, the Queen betrothed Princess Victoria to Duke Michael of Russia.
And he's the one who got England involved in the Russian Revolution?
That's right. And with the lives of 2 English princesses at stake, we're honor bound to fight.
That's a problem that every story set in another time period has to deal with, but in a show about actual history, it's also crucial, since not only do you need to explain the actual issue,
Teddy Roosevelt.
I do not know him.
Oh, no.
you also need to explain to the audience why it's a problem if they don't fix it.
Please, Mr. Roosevelt. You don't want to die.
Bogg flirts with a woman while Jeffrey regales us with historical notes. Sometimes the pair are separated, sometimes they pick up a hitchhiker. It's funny to watch this precocious genius wander into a situation and tell JP Morgan to chill, or to tell an imprisoned Abe Lincoln to keep his massive chin up, though he might have to duck out of the way.
Don't worry about it, Mr. President. When the time comes, you'll know what to say.
Voyagers does manage not to feel like every episode is exactly the same, as there'll be complications, like losing the Omni in some form.
You stupid idiot! Now I'll never get back to Bogg!
Or someone they meet along the way is transported with them. In one episode, Cleopatra ends up in New York during Prohibition and becomes a gangster's girlfriend. At one point, we're introduced to a retired Voyager, Isaac Wolfstein, who's slightly mischievous and just wants to be left on a desert island. Well,
Voyager School.
midway through the series, we get an episode that greatly expands on the lore of the series, such as it is. Bogg is put on trial for not doing Voyager stuff all that well. This is obviously a Voyager version of stack ranking. Here, Bogg's career is threatened, especially since Voyagers seem to work on at-will employment and don't do performance improvement plans. There's also likely no severance or a reference given, so Bogg wouldn't even be able to get a job mopping the floor at the time tunnel.
The boy must be returned to 1982.
However, it turns out the prosecutor Drake has been fiddling these trials since he has his own ideas of how Voyagers should operate. The bit I haven't said out loud, as this was also just an excuse to make a clip show. Clip shows are occasionally an economic necessity, but they're something that almost nobody likes. Networks hate them because they feel like they're being cheated, and viewers despise them. How many Star Trek fans will say Shades of Grey is their favourite episode? Though on the other hand, how many love The Menagerie? They're often made to balance the budget, framing sequences usually being much simpler and can be shot in half the time of a regular episode. When a clip show pops up in the first season of a show, it's particularly egregious. I mean, look who's talking. I get the irony, so if we use clips of a clip show showing a clip from an earlier episode, what happens? Here, at least, the framing material is really well done and much more interesting than usual.
You mean Bogg and me?
You're Voyagers, aren't you?
Oh, we were waiting for you to tell us if we were or not.
Well, you are.
By the end, Jeffrey is an officially sanctioned Voyager now, but the pair celebrate prematurely.
Yeah, we're partners again!
Here's your new guidebook.
This was a cool look at expanding what the show was about. I mean, now we have an evil Voyager out there who will return later on.
Dress codes on the Titanic are unimpeachable.
In another episode, we'd meet Voyager Olivia, who's lost her mojo while trying to retrieve the Mona Lisa from the Titanic. What? Oh, look, they've got an explanation for that as well. We get a show where Bogg and Jeffrey help Charles Lindbergh begin his cross-Atlantic journey. Indeed, they make it so. In another, they would scupper Franklin Roosevelt's career in Hollywood, and Bogg would then take it upon himself to taunt FDR.
Mr. Bogg, I need help getting into the chair.
The polio paralyzed your arms too, huh?
And act as his physiotherapist.
Stop!
It's hard to say where Voyagers may have gone if it had continued, but you could see the formula evolving so that not every episode was set in multiple time periods, and later in the season there wasn't always a link between the two settings. At the start of one episode, Bogg spars with Joe Louis, and then Jeffrey has to land a jet airplane by himself. Over the course of the series, Bogg and Jeffrey help with the invention of the airplane, the light bulb, the telephone. They set Moses floating down the Nile, stop Billy the Kid from killing Teddy Roosevelt.
That man is Jack the Ripper.
Unlike a lot of sci-fi shows with time travelers, Bogg and Phineas are not actually lost.
Bogg, it's Spartacus.
At the start of each episode, the Omni functions on automatic, taking them to where they need to go.
Cuba, 1898.
Cuban Revolution against the Spanish.
Sometimes just for shits and giggles. When I want to get somewhere in my car, I set Google Maps for a walking route. You really should see some of the looks I get when I cut through the pedestrian mall.
You said I do something important in New Orleans. How did you know?
Sometimes I get these hunches about people. I had a feeling Destiny had something planned for you.
Voyagers generally looks quite expensive, even though you can see where they have economized in places, with liberal use of stock footage from feature films. Universal's backlot and standing sets are put to excellent use, giving the show an expensive feel and texture. The show did feature anyone and everyone who was working at that time. Those folks who did an episode of every single show at one time or another, and of course, there's Lance.
I don't believe this guy.
Of course, it's all filmed in LA, so there are so many incredibly dodgy attempts at British accents that it sounds like Kevin Costner was working as a dialogue coach at the studio.
The sun can't come out soon enough for me. Think we ought to try another trail?
Who was them two with Fagin?
Just a couple of blokes like us.
Keep your eye on where you're shooting. You're just at the wrong target.
It would be rude to interrupt right in the best part of the story.
You're British?
Yes, but very far away from home. I'm afraid I shall never see England again.
Voyagers was created by James D. Parriott, who'd previously written for The $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, and Incredible Hulk. And indeed, several of the show's producers and writers had worked on the then recently ended Incredible Hulk TV show. Parriott would later go on to create other series such as Misfits of Science and Forever Night.
There's a whole branch of the Bogg family in Georgia.
Bogg, yes, sir. I have heard the name.
You probably know some of my cousins. Beauregard Bogg?
Voyagers is an unusual series in that it's semi-educational. Each episode ends with this voiceover.
Take a voyage down to your public library. It's all in books.
If I wanted a history lesson, I'd read a book. Also, if I wanted to read a book, I'd have to learn how to read first. One of the show's producers was an offshoot of the Scholastic Corporation, whose business was educational books and the like. See, it's a dark web of mega companies selling books trying to get your kids to learn something from a book. Of course, I had Alexa read that to me from a Facebook post because, again, I can't read. He who ignores history is doomed to watch YouTube videos from people who also ignored it.
They just make up stories about you because you're a legend.
You're leaning on a little thick, don't you think?
On its initial US run, Voyager's competition was 60 minutes. Yet Voyagers was still rating well enough for a renewal until NBC thought they had a chance at usurping 60 minutes with their own news magazine show, which of course tanked in the ratings. But the damage was done and that was it for Voyagers. Putting Voyagers against 60 minutes is sending a goat across a minefield, and of course that rarely works out all that well for the goat.
Phineas? I love you.
After the show, Peluce continued to act for a few more years until he moved on to other pursuits, though he'd later work on a drama project with his half-sister, Punky Brewster star Soleil Moon Frye.
You shouldn't try to kid a kidder.
Okay. I don't know. I guess there's a price to pay for everything, huh? even being a Voyager.
In discussing Voyager, there is an unfortunate postscript which we're going to discuss now, but consider this a content warning because it's unpleasant. Jon-Erik Hexum soon landed a lead role on Glenn A. Larson's 1984 series Cover Up. During the early part of that show's season, boredom on set saw Hexum deciding to pass the time by playing Russian roulette with a prop gun containing a round of blank ammunition. The gun fired. The wadding used to seal in the gunpowder on the blank cartridge was all it took to cause Hexum a serious brain injury, of which he soon died. After the actor's tragic death, a TV movie was made by editing some episodes of Voyagers together with some redubbed footage, adding the idea of a supercomputer controlling the pair's travels.
Hang on, kid. We're on our way to New York.
Voyagers was like many attempts at time travel shows attempted by American television.
I was stupid. I could have ruined everything. I could have got Roosevelt killed.
All I care about is you're okay.
Its light and frothy adventure feel, dealing with a lot of serious historical events in a really compressed way, did make for an entertaining, if sometimes a little corny show.
You think that one's crazy? Wait to hear the next one.
I had watched at least some episodes on its first showing where I lived, and caught a few episodes shown sometime in the 90s. It's something I found I appreciated more as an adult than I did as a kid, mainly because if I wanted to read a book, thanks to my staggering illiteracy, I'd have to wait until the 1990s until books on tape really took off.
Bob, you can't! It's too hot!
And the ocean's too cold.
For this review, I like the show well enough. Its strengths outweigh its weaknesses. Its incredibly superficial look at historical events and characters, convenient plot ciphers and slightly simplistic solutions are one thing. But the main characters and the two stars are very charming and likable. There's a chemistry between the actors. These two characters are almost like brothers who would do anything for each other. The action and production values are very high, and the breakneck pace rarely lets up. There were a lot of action-adventure shows in the 1980s, but Voyagers does feel like a fairly unique concoction. 2 parts pineapple juice, 1 part lemonade, 3 parts Red Bull.
You know if there was any way for the Omni to get you back home.
I know.
Voyagers feels a bit like those Hanna-Barbera adaptations of popular sitcoms where, lo and behold, the Fonz and the Happy Days gang go time traveling. Voyagers is better than those shows. If you want a short, breezy 1980s adventure series with 2 charming stars who may or may not resemble a midget Starsky with Hutch, Voyagers is kinda fun.
Well, I wish we had more time to talk about it, but we really have to get going.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
You know, this baby's gonna be head of the Allied forces in World War II and President of the United States.
Don't tell Mr. Eisenhower that.